When you think you've done everything right, you followed all the right steps, listened to all the right advice, did all the right things, then why didn't you get what you wanted? Why are you stuck on the outside looking in? In the video I made last week, I talked about a secret that very few students and parents know. There are often the difference between making it into the schools of their dreams or being rejected and simply being another Ivy League hopeful. That particular secret being, not every school in the Ivy League is the same. It's a very straightforward secret, but what does it actually mean? On the surface, it's obvious. Of course, every school is different. That makes perfect sense, but rarely do people go deeper and uncover what it takes to capitalize on these differences. Again, I ask you, if you did everything right, then why are you on the outside looking in? Why weren't you able to get exactly what you wanted? It's important you pay very close attention now, because this one thing is what parents and students miss that costs them a better life, a better future, and the incredible life they dream of. Consider the next two parts of this video a simulation for two common types of students who applied to the Ivy League, and their experiences while doing so. There are nuances to them all, but their overarching story remains relatively the same. We'll discuss the details later and how reflective this model is of students as a whole. But for now, sit back, relax, and brace yourselves. He stepped off the stage to a standing ovation and another round of applause as the lights began to dim. This was the third show she'd had in just as many days, and it was a complete success. She went backstage to change back into her regular clothes and breathed out a slight sigh of relief. This was the last spring show of the year and a high school career that was just flying by. She grabbed her backpack, her books, chatted with her friends, and hopped in her mom's car and started to head home, feeling a mixture of sadness and joy as they left the school. And looking back on the school as it grew smaller and smaller in the distance, she began to reminisce. Amy was a junior in the spring of her senior year of high school. She participated in theater and debate team and was her class treasurer and president of her school's newspaper. She loved the arts and was completely absorbed by it. That spring, Amy was in the process of beginning what would be the culmination of her high school experience. She started looking into schools she wanted to apply to, career paths she wanted to have, and started the process of writing her college essays for the fall application season. Now fast forward to September of her senior year, and she was in a phenomenal position to get into the schools of her dreams. Over the summer, she narrowed down her list of schools to 2 dream schools and 5 safety schools, and had taken the SAT one more time, scoring a 1540 with a super score of a 1550. On paper, she seemed like the perfect applicant. She had fantastic grades, took a number of difficult courses and did well in them. And finally, she had a number of extracurriculars, like being a cheer captain and class treasurer, that she loved and was passionate about. Once again, on paper, she seemed like the perfect applicant. In that fall, she applied to all of her safety schools and got in with ease. After that initial boost of confidence, she felt very good about her chances of getting to the 2 schools that she really wanted to get into, Harvard and Stanford. That winter, she breezed through the common application questions, refined her incredible common application essay that landed her 5 schools already, and crushed her interviews with Stanford and Harvard alumni. She felt incredible and believed that she was almost guaranteed a spot in one, if not both of these schools. Now 3 months later in the spring, she was filled with nervousness and excitement as she waited her results. The clock seemed to crawl as it got closer and closer to the time. Tick, tock, tick, tock, tick, tock. And now it was finally time. With her mom right behind her, she gingerly opened up the computer, took a breath, and logged into the application portal for Harvard. She held her breath as the page loaded. 1 tick, 2 ticks, 3 ticks, 4. And the page finally responded. She dragged her mouse over the decision section and held her breath. Her heart and mind raced with angst and excitement. 1 tick, 2 ticks, 3 ticks, 4. It loads. And the first words that catch her eye are, "We're disappointed to say." Sadly, she read through the rest of the letter, taking it in. It stung, but she still at Stanford. She closed that portal, took a breath, then headed over to Stanford's. This one seemed to load even slower than Harvard's. 1 tick, 2 ticks, 3 ticks, 4. She gingerly dragged her mouse over to the decision portion of the portal, a pit forming in her stomach as she did so. With a wince, she clicked on the page and held her breath. 1 tick, 2 ticks, 3 ticks, 4. "We're disappointed to say," it read, and she burst into tears. He jumped off the field. Sweat dripped from his face as he ran up to his parents, a huge smile on his face while doing so. His lacrosse team had just won one of the biggest games of the year and were now headed for the state's tournament. It was the first time the school had done so in almost 2 decades, and everyone was ecstatic. He met up with his friends, who were thrilled for him, and eventually found his way back home for a shower. And as he did so, he reflected on what couldn't have been a more perfect ending for his junior year. A win on one of the largest stages of his life to send his team to the state tournament. The perfect ending to a perfect year. Jack had quite the year this year. He put on 2 incredible shows in the fall and winter for theater, went to the state level in Model Congress, and qualified for the country level in his chess club. Overall, his junior year could not have been any better, and now that it was coming to an end, it was time for him to begin preparing for the next step of his journey, starting the college application process. When school let out, he spent the entire summer traveling to different colleges, doing research on different programs, and writing sample responses to the prompts presented. He spent the time looking through countless YouTube videos, trying to find the similarities and differences between students who were accepted at one school but not another, and he tried to figure out if there was any pattern to these decisions. One day, as he was scrolling through the 100th YouTube video about students who had gone to the dream school and the stats and extracurriculars they had, something clicked. He realized that certain schools and certain types of schools tend to accept certain types of students more often than others. He started looking more closely at these videos, specifically from those from Harvard and Stanford, trying to piece together which types of students were most likely to get into those 2 schools. And after getting acceptances from his safety schools in the fall, he applied to those 2 in the winter of his senior year. 3 months rolled by and it's finally time for decisions to come out. Time slows to a crawl and the minutes tick on until he would finally know the outcome of his applications. 1 tick, 2 ticks, 3 ticks, 4. He opens up the Harvard decision portal. 1 tick, 2 ticks, 3 ticks, 4. He clicks on the location to see the decision. 1 tick, 2 ticks, 3 ticks, 4. And with one word, his face lights up. Congratulations. That was one under the belt. Now it was time to check on Stanford. He held his breath and clicked on the link, but something in him told him that he had a good chance this time. He could just feel it. 1 tick, 2 ticks, 3 ticks, 4. Congratulations. So what happened here? Why did Jack get exactly what he wanted and Amy didn't? What did he have that Amy didn't have? You see, Jack knew something Amy didn't, and even though Amy worked harder, was objectively a better student and did everything right, there was one thing she missed. One thing she didn't take into account when she applied to Harvard and Stanford that cost her everything. Stick with me now, because it's about time you and her find out exactly what this detail was. Before we can talk about what Jack figured out that gave him the advantage over Amy into getting into Harvard and Stanford, we need to briefly talk about how colleges go about deciding who gets accepted and rejected from their school. Colleges use a student's grades, extracurriculars, and story to decide whether or not a student would be a good fit at their school or not. So how exactly does this work? Let's start with the 3-level funnel-shaped model of student application. At the very top of this funnel, we have all the applicants applying to a given school. For a school like Harvard, Princeton, Stanford, and Yale, these numbers can easily exceed 50,000 in a given year. For simplicity's sake, let's assume that exactly 50,000 people are applying to this particular university, and of those 50,000 applicants, it can only accept 2,500 of them. This is similar to Stanford's numbers and will help make things much easier. So let's start with round 1. From the general pool, the students enter a filter, a barrier, a first round they must overcome to be put into the second round. Typically, this first round in filter is academic. The college in question looks to see if you have a GPA, SAT score, and AP test resume above a certain level. For schools in the Ivy League, this level is usually the top 10% GPA in your school, with an SAT score above a 1520 and 3 AP tests scoring a 4 or higher. From this, typically around 80% of the applicant pool is cut. This drops the 50,000 applicant pool to about 10,000 at the end of the first round. Now let's talk about round 2. And in this round, this is where things get interesting. After making sure that the applicants are sufficiently qualified academically, what the admission officers look at now is the different roles each student can fit into within the campus environment. This is where extracurriculars come into play. What the admission officers do now is trying to match each student and their interests, hobbies, likes, and dislikes to a potential role on campus to see if they'd be a good fit. And as they do this, they create 3 piles of applicants. A no pile, for students who, while academically gifted, wouldn't be a good fit to the campus. A maybe pile for students who might be a good fit for the campus, and a yes pile for students who would definitely be a good fit for the campus. Now from this round, about 50% of applicants are put into the no pile, 30% are put into the maybe pile, and only the last 20% are put into the yes pile. That reduces the 10,000 at the end of round 1 to 3,000 maybes and 2,000 yeses. Now let's talk about the third and final round, round 3. In round 3, here's where the common application comes into play. These last 3,000 students who are put into the maybe pile are now evaluated based on their stories, their writing ability, and how well they can wow the admission officer. And of these 3,000 applicants in the maybe pile, only 500 or so are chosen. And then finally, at the end of round 3, 2,500 people are chosen to be part of the following year's class of undergraduates. Now you're probably asking, what does this have to do with Amy and Jack? We'll get to that. But for now, what you need to know is that in this video, we're going to focus on this level right here, level 2. Because this is where a number of students drop the ball and don't even get the chance to wow the admissions officer into the school of their dreams. What does Jack know that helped him get in that Amy doesn't? Well, let's find out. Previous video, I mentioned that the number one secret that separates wealthy students who capitalize on loopholes in the application process from those who do not is the fact that they understand what each school they're applying to is looking for. But what does this actually mean? As mentioned in a previous video, Each school has a unique character profile, and as a result, tends to accept certain types of students over other types of students. In general, the four main school types are business boroughs, political science paradises, technology towns, and humanities havens. Business boroughs are schools whose culture is primarily focused around business and their business schools. Some examples of these such schools would be Dartmouth, the University of Chicago, and NYU, New York University. Political science paradises are schools whose culture is based around their schools for political science or international relations and affairs. Some examples of such schools would be Princeton, Harvard, and Columbia University. Technology towns are schools whose culture is primarily based around their STEM programs. Some examples of these particular schools would be Stanford, MIT, and Caltech, the California Institute of Technology. Finally, humanities havens are schools whose culture is based around the humanities. Some schools which will fall into this list are Yale, the University of California, Berkeley, and the University of California, Los Angeles. Here's a graph depicting how common it is to find each type of school. Now this ties into the 5 common student types that schools usually select from: the athletic academic, the professional polymath, the STEM scholar, the humanities intellectual, and the sharp social scientist. The athletic academic is a student whose high school experience and resume is defined primarily through their athletic achievement. These type of students are usually division or state champs in their given sport and are at times recruited by colleges to continue participating in that sport at their university. The professional polymath is a student who can do it all. And not only do that, but they do it all very, very well. This type of student usually participated in a number of different clubs in a number of different areas. You'll find them participating in STEM-based clubs, humanities-based clubs, and social science-based clubs, in addition to sports and other extracurricular activities. Beyond that, this student also typically takes a number of different classes in a number of different fields, ranging from the maths to the sciences and humanities and social sciences, and excels in all of them. These types of students are often heavily recruited by colleges and often face the best odds of getting into the schools of their dreams. The STEM scholar is a student who predominantly is STEM focused. You'll find them in a number of math, science, and engineering classes and clubs. While they may do other activities and take other classes, the resume is predominantly defined by their passion for the STEM field. The humanities intellectual is a student whose high school experience and subsequent resume has been defined by their participation in the humanities discipline. Whether this comes in the form of taking a number of humanities classes, being the president of their newspaper club, or being an actress in a theater show, their high school experiences have been largely shaped and defined by their participation in the humanities fields. As a result of this type of student being wildly common among high school students, they often face the most treacherous road in standing out and getting into schools that they want. Now finally, we have our sharp social scientists. These students have a keen interest in the political science, history, and social science fields. You'll usually find them in clubs like History Bowl, extracurriculars like National History Day, or in classes like AP US History, AP Government and Politics, and AP European History. The resume and high school experience is littered with a keen and clear interest in the social sciences. Here's a graph depicting how common each type of student is. When one crosses certain student types with certain schools, either results in a boost for that student in their odds of getting into that particular school, no change in the student's odds of getting into that school, or hurts the student's chances for getting into that particular school. For example, a student who's a professional polymath would do well in applying to technology towns, as there is a massive boost for them in terms of their odds of getting into those type of schools. On the flip side, however, humanities intellectuals would do well to stay away from technology towns, as there is a large penalty for them in terms of their odds when they apply to these types of schools. Similarly, STEM scholars would do well applying to humanities havens, as those schools give them a boost in their odds of ending up at the school. And on the flip side, these students would be best to avoid business boroughs, as they give the lowest acceptance rate multiplier for them. Students who understand and use these tricks to their advantage have incredible success when applying to elite level schools. Those who don't are usually locked out and are stuck on the outside looking into what could have been. And that brings us right back to Jack and Amy. If you were to describe Amy's student type, what would you describe her as? Is she an athletic academic, a professional polymath, a STEM scholar, or a humanities intellectual? Take a second to pause here and return back to the beginning of part 1 and make your choice. So what do you think? How about Jack? If you said that Amy was a humanities intellectual and that Jack was a professional polymath, he'd be 100% correct. Let's go over why. If you remember, Amy was very passionate about the humanities. She participated in a number of humanities clubs and extracurriculars like the newspaper club, theater, and the writing club. Beyond that, she even took some humanities courses such as AP Language and Composition and AP Literature. Given the fact that she wasn't too into sports, although she was a cheer captain, and her personal essay reflected her love for humanities and how she can use it to change the world, Amy is a very solid humanities intellectual. Now on the flip side, Jack took a number of different classes in a number of different topics like AP US History, AP Calculus AB, and AP Chemistry. Furthermore, he was the captain of his high school soccer team and did a number of different extracurriculars across a number of different disciplines. He was the quintessential example of a professional polymath. Now, if you remember, Amy and Jack were dead set on getting into two particular schools, Harvard and Stanford. Harvard is a political science paradise, a place which isn't a bad choice for humanities intellectuals like Amy, but certainly doesn't help her with her odds of getting into the school. Even worse for her, Stanford is a technology town, a place where humanities intellectual applications go to die. Amy's odds of getting into these schools was nearly impossible from the start, even though she is an exceptional student. On the other hand, regardless of whether the school is a technology town or political science paradise, Jack will flourish and have a much better chance of being accepted by the schools as compared with Amy. This is the reason why Jack and students like him can be worse students, but still get into the exact schools they want to with ease, while students like Amy, who do everything right, can't. Now let's explore some alternative strategies and go over what Amy could have done to give her a much better chance of getting into either Harvard or Stanford, or going to an alternative Ivy League or Ivy League caliber school. What Jack found out that Amy didn't know was this: how different schools selected their students. The chart we showed earlier depicted which types of students had good, okay, and fantastic chances of getting into the schools they want. As you can see, for the most part, professional polymaths fare pretty well regardless of the type of school they apply to. While on the flip side, humanities intellectuals need to apply to select schools to have a near average chance of getting into the school they want. For this reason, students who are humanities intellectuals need to be much more strategic with their application decisions. For example, in this case, since Amy is a humanities intellectual, she'd be better off applying to schools which are humanities havens, and although not as advantageous, political science paradises and business boroughs. A school like Stanford, a technology town, was the worst type of school she could have applied to, and almost guaranteed that she would be rejected. Now, if Amy knew what Jack knew, she could do a number of things to help her application. 1. Instead of leaning too heavily on her humanities background during her time in high school, she could present herself as a sharp social scientist. As a result of Amy doing a number of clubs and taking a number of classes which belong to both the humanities and social science fields, she has the ability to choose which field would best help her stand out and give her the best odds for getting the school she wants. This would change her school diagram from something like this to something like this, a wildly different outcome. As a sharp social scientist instead of a humanities intellectual, she would actually fare a much better chance than average of getting into Stanford. And if this is what she really wants, she can do just that. 2. Amy could have participated in more clubs and extracurriculars that help her move towards being more of a professional polymath. This means participating in a number of clubs outside of the humanities fields. Participating and excelling in clubs like Science Olympiad, Math League, being the captain of her swim team, or top scorer on her lacrosse teams would have helped her become more of a professional polymath. Or, since she was already a cheerleader and a cheer captain, she could have focused more on that in her application. This option is a very unlikely possibility for most students, as it's tough enough to balance their current clubs, and adding more would only increase the load and make it harder to do any of them to the best of their ability. Now finally, the last thing Amy could do is this. 3. Amy could apply to a different school. Instead of applying to Harvard and Stanford, schools who don't give a better than average chance for students like her, she could apply to a school like Yale, a humanities haven, to get at least an average chance of getting into the school she'd be interested in going to. Now let's take a look at Jack. Now in Jack's case, he doesn't really have to do much to change his strategy. He set himself up for maximal success by becoming a professional polymath early in his high school career. This put him in a phenomenal position to capitalize on and use it later when he really needed to. He did what every student should strive to do. Figure out which school they want to go to, research that school, and take steps to put themselves in the best position to get into that school. But is this assessment correct? Does it work for everyone? The truth is, I can't comment on every single college student in every college application in existence. Since a college application comes down to a number of things beyond simply a student's extracurriculars, solely focusing on them as a key to college acceptance would be incomplete. But let me point out some key things that every parent and student should be absolutely aware of. 1. Researching the schools you're applying to before applying to them is an important step in improving your odds of getting into that school. Every student should be aware of what type of student they're presenting themselves as well as the type of student the school they'd like to go to tends to accept. A student who applies to the wrong type of school can metaphorically shoot themselves in the foot before the application even begins and destroy their chances of getting into the schools they want. Students who can present themselves in a way as to catch the eye of the college they want stand a much better chance of getting into the school they want, as opposed to those who simply apply and play the odds hoping to win the grand prize. 2. There's a 3-tiered system of applying to and getting into college, and the probability that a student gets into the dream school changes based on which barrier they've crossed. To start, there are 3 main barriers students have to jump over to get into the schools of their dreams. These barriers are the academic barrier, the extracurricular and campus life barrier, and finally, the culture and story barrier. In an example before, we mentioned a scenario very similar to one found at a number of Ivy League schools, where 50,000 people apply for the school, and after going through each of the barriers, only 2,500 people accepted. That is about a 5% acceptance rate. However, what you have to keep in mind is that this acceptance rate is radically different once a person moves past the barrier in question. Let's say that, identical to the example before, a person is applying to a school which has 50,000 applicants and only 2,500 of them are accepted. Before the first round, their odds of getting to the university are 2,500 out of 50,000, 5%. Now let's say they make it out of the first round, second round. Now there are only 10,000 applicants competing for 2,500 spots. Just like that, their odds of getting to the university jump from 5% to 25%. 2,500 out of 10,000. Now finally, let's say that they make it out of the second round into the third round. Now there are only 5,000 applicants competing for 2,500 spots. Their odds of getting into the school they want is now a whopping 50%. The odds of getting into a school like Princeton, Stanford, or Yale changes depending on how many barriers a student is able to pass, and it can jump from as low as 5% at the beginning to as high as 80 or 90% after the first 2 barriers are crossed. And that leads me into point number 3. Focusing on one tier at a time is the best strategy students and parents can use to get into their dream schools. When getting into college, focusing on one thing at a time, one tier at a time, we've found is the best way of getting past each of the barriers into the school you want. What I've found through helping students and parents is that they usually get fixated on one of the barriers, usually the academic or extracurricular barrier, and often neglect the other barriers to their detriment. These are the parents and students who have taken the SAT and scored a 1540, but still spend hours trying to get a 1600. Or in 15 clubs and activities, but think that 20 will increase their odds of getting into the school they want. This is simply not the case. Once a student is past a specific barrier, they don't need to focus on it as much anymore and can focus on getting over the next barrier. For example, once a student scores a 1540 on the SAT, we advise them to not spend any more time thinking about the SAT and instead spend time on their academics and extracurricular activities. Similarly, if a student has stellar SAT scores and incredible extracurriculars, they should dedicate most of their time to crafting an eye-catching story that'll help push them from a maybe into a yes once they apply for admission at an elite school. By focusing on one level at a time, students put themselves in the best position to succeed and to get exactly what they're looking for. Applying to college is like baking a cake. You need the right ingredients in the right order coupled with the right amount of time to get something incredible. However, none of this can work without the right recipe. That's what understanding how colleges select their students is like. It's understanding the recipe a college like Princeton uses to select their students so that you can position yourself in the right way and come out with an amazing cake. The pursuit of an Ivy League education, financial freedom, or a better life are not uncommon dreams. They're shared by many, including myself. Before you jump headfirst into the opportunity, you must take a second look to look around and ask the question, if they are doing everything right, why aren't they getting what they want? It's best to pause, think and understand what it really takes to make it. Then after you figure that out, proceed. Because if you don't, you'll just be another Ivy League hopeful who doesn't understand why they're on the outside looking in at a life that could have been. A question I often get from usually parents and students in the humanities or social science disciplines is, if schools don't tend to accept or like students like me, should I just lie in my application? And the obvious answer is no, don't lie in your application. It just makes things way more complicated, way more stressful, and adds more stress and complication to an already complicated and stressful process. You don't want that. Also, it's going to be tough to keep track of all those different stories, all those different lies as you're applying to all these different schools. So generally speaking, don't lie in your application. It's not going to help you in the long run. But what you can do instead is highlight different parts of your personality depending on the school you want to go to. I remember a couple of years ago, there was a student I was coaching who wanted to get into Caltech and Carnegie Mellon. And I remember what she did was, instead of lying on her application or claiming she did things she didn't, what she did was pick up completely new extracurriculars and interests in a computer science club, in a chess club, in a chemistry club. Even though she was a humanities intellectual, she loved the humanities, was like the president of her newspaper club, a poetry club, a public speaking club, etc. But what she did was she picked up new extracurriculars in fields that these schools liked, that these schools tended to accept. So she presented herself as a STEM scholar to that school and was accepted more because she was a STEM scholar instead of presenting herself as a humanities intellectual and probably getting rejected. So that's what you can do instead of lying on your application. Instead of lying and presenting something that's fake and not you, you can highlight different parts of yourselves so that you can be accepted for you instead of something which was made up to try to get it. In this video, I mentioned the different barriers students need to cross to get into the schools they want. And what I'll do in the next video is go over the specific steps each student needs to take to get into the exact school they want, regardless of what type of student they are. Like for example, if you're a humanities intellectual trying to get into Stanford, you'll need a different set of steps than a STEM scholar who's trying to get into Princeton. So I'll get very specific with each school, which is an Ivy League caliber school, and list the exact steps every single student of each archetype needs to take to get into that specific school. As always, thank you for watching. If you like what you saw here, make sure you hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and turn on your notifications so that you don't miss any of this type of content. Thanks again, and I'll see you soon.